Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Leaders Podcast, part of the Jobs with Impact compendium of resources for people who want to make a positive impact on the world. I'm David Rosenheim, your host. Every week, we bring you in-depth conversations with people who are leading the way to a sustainable future. I hope these conversations will be as inspiring to you as they are to me, and most of all, I hope that they'll empower you to take action. The planet needs you. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to jobswithimpact.com. Hello, folks. Welcome to the podcast. We are now nearly finished with the California Leadership Series. We have one more surprise guest who's coming in December, and this will be a big one. We are now moving on to talk with leaders across a range of sectors and geographies. We're also shifting to a bi-weekly schedule for the time being. If you haven't done so, please be sure to give us a rating and a review in iTunes. It really helps us to spread the word. And please also tell your friends and colleagues about the Sustainability Leaders Podcast. I really appreciate it. This week, we're talking to an expert on forest policy. Forest conservation and careers in forests and agriculture are more critical than ever. While the interview was recorded a few months ago during the summer, and there were plenty of fires burning then, as I record this intro now, it looks like a yellow, hazy apocalypse outside my window. The 109,000-acre campfire in Butte County is only 25% contained as of now, on November 11th, 2018. And the winds are sending smoke across all of the Bay Area. This is combined with an unusually hot and windy and dry November, and it makes the air, even here near the coast, really hard to breathe. Both my kids are having to wear air masks, and our eyes are burning. This, combined with fires in Malibu and Ventura County, have already killed 25 people. And our hearts and thoughts go out to their families, and hundreds of thousands have been driven from their homes. This week's guest works at the intersection of climate change and forests. Louis Blumberg is director of the California Climate Change Program for the Nature Conservancy. If you're interested in working on environmental issues at all, not just forestry, I really encourage you to listen to this full episode. Louis has a ton of useful advice on how to build expertise, cultivate networks, and chart a career path that will put you right in the middle of the mix. Louis is a great lover of forests and a world expert in forest conservation policy. While his official work is focused on California, he's expert in REDD+. REDD+ stands for countries' efforts to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation and foster conservation, sustainable management of forests, and enhance the overall forest carbon stocks around the world. Louis is also expert on other forest conservation efforts from Mexico to Indonesia to Brazil. He's been at the Nature Conservancy since 2004, and before that, Louis helped to oversee external affairs for California's Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. It was fun to learn more about Louis's career path, which begins, as mine did, oddly enough, as a professional musician. I think you'll enjoy our conversation. So, just for starters, I know that you had a very different career, and we can talk about that in a minute, before you got into working on climate. So the first question is really, why are you doing this? Why are you dedicating your career to working on climate?
Well, I feel that climate change poses the biggest environmental challenge, if not existential challenge, to our society. I'm interested in nature and the environment, and there's no issue that is more important to address. And so I feel actually very fortunate to be here at the Nature Conservancy, where I've been able to focus exclusively on climate change for the last 10 years of my 14 years here. And overall 18 years working on climate and nature.
So tell me a little bit about the nature of your work at TNC and maybe just a few words broadly on what the Nature Conservancy does.
In reverse order then, the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to protect the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we've been working for about 70 years on that goal. And around 2000, the organization 2003, the organization decided it needed to move, expand beyond just land acquisition to looking at public policy. And I have been working for Gray Davis in the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection as the deputy director for external affairs, working on the intersection of nature and climate there. And so I was hired by the Nature Conservancy to work on a policy initiative around forests and climate in 2004.
And what now in your role at TNC as running the climate initiative in California, can you sort of characterize your main priorities? What are you how are your days structured? What are you working on day to day, and what's really important right now?
Well, I've been working on the intersection of nature and climate. We recognize that in order to succeed in addressing climate change, we must deal with the role of the land sector. And while we must continue to make progress in reducing emissions from the energy and the transportation sector, we won't succeed without dealing with the land sector. Globally, emissions from forests and farms are about 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we know from recent studies that we have done that changes in land use and land management and protection of land can generate up to 37% of the emission reductions necessary to address climate change. Here in California, we did a study recent study that was published in the Journal of the National Academy of Sciences that showed that up to 17% of the reductions that California needs to meet its climate goals could be generated from changes in land use. So I've been working to promote public policy to capture the power of nature to address climate change, both in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, which are the source of the problem, but also in helping society respond to the impacts and build resilient ecosystems and resilient human communities. And that is sometimes called adaptation. And so my job is a lot of it's focused on public policy, working with the legislature directly and my team. I lead a cross-sectoral team that includes lobbyists, external affairs specialists, scientists, communications people, and other policy analysts. We work with the legislature. We work with government agencies a lot, especially the California Air Resources Board and the California Natural Resources Agency. And recently, I've been spending time working on the implementation of laws and policies that I helped get enacted over the past 14 years of my career.
So you just sort of gave a sense of the types of roles that are on your team. And I know that doesn't include everything at TNC, but you talked about policy specialists. I assume there are legal specialists within that. You talked about the role of science. Talk about the different types of roles and backgrounds necessary for those roles at TNC. I know it's a pretty broad-based question, but people that are interested in this kind of work want to know sort of what's available if they want to work on these issues.
Okay. Well, first of all, the Nature Conservancy is a large international conservation organization. So we have 4,000 employees. We're active and have offices in all 50 U.S. states, and we have a presence in 70 foreign countries. So we're a big one. And we are a science-based organization. So we have a lot of scientists on our staff. Many have PhDs. You'll see ecologists, biologists, hydrologists. I think those are the main disciplines. We have lawyers, attorneys that have, some are practicing law, some are just advisors. So, there's a lot of science, and then we have a very strong geospatial program. So we have analysts and experts in the geographic information systems, and we have other specialists in other geospatial analysis. So we do a lot of map making here. We do a lot of analysis that looks at scenario planning. We have people that have experience in modeling. A lot of the scientists, whether they be ecologists or we actually have some climate scientists too, who have degrees in climate science, but they especially have some experience in modeling. And then our policy analysts run the gambit. We have people with urban planning degrees, usually masters. We have people with law degrees who don't practice law, but they're policy analysts. And they tend to develop expertise in natural systems. Often they do not come here with expertise in natural resources. Some do. There are some that come with bachelor's degrees, but typically they're people with at least a master's degree. We don't have economists. We need economists. We have a couple of people that came out of the investment world that are working with us now in different ways. Actually, we have a couple of economists, within the 4,000 employees, somewhere there are some economists. The California program has about 200 people, and here we do not have an economist. But so we're fairly decentralized, and so and fairly independent, even though all the finances are controlled by the headquarters office in Arlington, Virginia. We have accountants and we have operations people, we have IT people. So in an organization of this size, it's pretty broad, as you can imagine.
So how about you? I mean, you talked a little bit about your background, but you and I share a background in music. And I know you spent the early part of your career as a musician. Talk about your training and sort of your point of entry. And I'm wondering, because you described a lot of fairly technical expertise that's required for the roles that you were describing. Are there openings in this field or at TNC specifically for people with more diverse backgrounds or sort of liberal arts backgrounds?
I think there are, but they tend to be, we see people that come from with BAs in a huge variety of disciplines. They typically go into the fundraising department, development department. And there it's been a challenge for them to break out and get into the land acquisition program or the other programs. The land acquisition program has people with expertise in real estate, but typically they don't come with that. So you see people with bachelor's or master's in natural resources and many disciplines like that. And even some of the social sciences working in the real estate acquisition department. But a lot of them come into development and a few are able to break out and get into the more programmatic work. The others work in development for a few years and then move on. So we have people that are writers, English majors that work, they write grants and things like that. And occasionally, some of them stay because they like the mission of the organization. So about me. Yeah. So I was a musician, as you noted, a professional musician for a long time. Was looking to make a career change. And I was, let me do the math here, about 36, 37 years old. I was interested in nature and the environment and liked to go hiking and camping. And learned about a program at UCLA. I was a musician in Los Angeles. I learned about a program in UCLA in urban planning that had 4 areas of discipline, and one of those was the environment. And so to improve my chances of being accepted into grad school as an adult and a major career changer at age 37, I volunteered for a clean air group and worked on air toxics from waste management and became a specialist in that little field. This was distinguished from hazardous waste. This was basically, what are the air quality impacts from garbage management, from managing solid waste? And so I went into grad school as an adult and took the classes in the environment area of emphasis. The program also had a collaboration with the UCLA Law School. So I took environmental law in the law school. I actually got the highest grade in the class and wasn't even a lawyer, nor did I intend to be. But I had, I think for me, it was changing careers as an adult. Well, it gave me the drive and the focus to go in 110%. I worked on water issues as a research assistant for the two lead environmental faculty and developed some expertise in that. And then as a group, we worked on issues of, we did an analysis of a trash burner, solid waste incinerator, and got involved in local politics in Los Angeles around that, built networks with West Side environmentalists and urban environmental justice advocates in South Central LA, and really became aware of the political power of environmental policy.
You mentioned sort of becoming an expert in a totally new field mid-career, and you did this through a combination of going back to school, but also through volunteering in the field. I just wrote an article on Jobs with Impact about how to become an expert, and really for the purpose of being able to do well in the job search and being able to ask informed questions with at least a baseline of real understanding of a sector that you want to work in. Then we talked in the article about volunteering at trade shows, for example, and going to industry conferences and trade shows is an incredible learning and networking opportunity. But talk to me just a little bit more about what volunteering in the air pollutants sector did for you in terms of establishing your expertise.
Well, so when I started looking around for an organization to volunteer with, in order, as I said, to improve my chances of getting into grad school, I went to the League of Conservation Voters, and they wanted me to go walk precincts and hand out literature, and that didn't seem like the right thing to do. And so I ended up with a small group, Coalition for Clean Air, and they needed somebody to deal with this new rulemaking process around air quality impacts from solid waste management. So I was able to find an issue that was actually a new issue. People had not been, there was no existing policy in this area. And so I knew nothing about this at all. I knew nothing about the chemistry involved, none of it. But I was in a room with people who also didn't know anything about it. Their experience was regulating air pollution, but they knew nothing about the intersection with garbage. And so we learned together. And because I threw myself into it, I was able to advocate a environmental perspective in this arena where there were no other environmental advocates. So basically, I had the floor and had that perspective. But that said, so I developed this expertise and continued to develop it in grad school, and ended up writing a book with a professor out of grad school called War on Waste, which sold over 10,000 copies and actually generated a little income. That was a pleasant surprise. But when I left grad school, I moved to San Francisco. I didn't have a job. And after a couple of years of kind of consulting, and I worked at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, didn't like that bureaucracy, I got involved in forests. So there again, I knew nothing about land management and national forest or forest management, or the issues involved in hydrology and ecology with forests and biodiversity. I had no training in that in grad school. I was all focused on urban pollution, not in natural resource management. So for me, it was the skills that I learned, the analytic skills, the communication skills, and the networking skills that I learned in and through my grad school experience that served me well in the forest arena. And I jumped in and sought out others who were expert in that area, and they were supportive and built the networks, and was able to succeed in that arena in a way that got me a political appointment with Gray Davis when he became the governor. So it's the skill set, I think, more than the actual specific knowledge that really helped me and make that transition.
Well, I think that's it's a great story, and it's a great model for people, particularly who are transitioning mid-career. And that was my story as well. And I, volunteering for a couple of groups really helped in my transition, as did going back to grad school when I was 34, 35. And I think, as you pointed out, those sort of transferable skills of communications, networking, and the ability to analyze and synthesize information are really important. I would probably add to your case, that you were out there and you were putting your foot forward, and that's really important in this field because the sustainability field requires leaders. It requires people who see the problem and who are going out and being proactive. And I've seen time and time again that when you do that, when you put yourself forward, when you show up, opportunities present themselves to you.
So let me just add, I think that, another key factor here, key attribute is communications.
Yeah.
I see myself as working at the intersection of policy and communications. And I believe the best policy advocates are those that can communicate them effectively. And those with communication skills, are able to succeed in policy. So I think that's another area, a trait really to focus on. I don't think you need training in that field to do that.
Well, but it does open up. I mean, kind of going back to the liberal arts versus technical training, the environmental field has lots and lots of jobs for people with technical backgrounds, whether it's science or engineering, but sometimes that complex science and technology requires translation. It requires communication, and I think that's an opportunity for people that are English majors or that are have some of those innate communication skills. So let's.
Yeah, always. Let me tell you another story. I think it's really right on point here. So part of the grad school experience at the UCLA Planning School was to do a summer internship. And I was able to get an internship for a member of the LA City Council, a man named Michael Wu. And I knew his chief of staff, and she said, he doesn't really have anybody focusing on environmental issues. Would you like an internship? And I said, great, I want to do it. And I met with him early on, and he said, look, I don't have a lot of time to deal with these issues. I want to do the right thing on the environment. You need to give me a one-page memo. You need to tell me what the problem is. You need to tell me, what is the context and what is your proposed solution, recommendation to me, and any potential downside. And so I became adept at the one-page memo. And that has served me really well to be able to distill complex information, figure out what's really the core of the problem, and then, what is the right, or what a possible solution, what is a recommended solution, and what to look out for. And so and people that work for me, I train them on that. The interns that come in intern for me, I have them go through the same exercise. If you can't say it on one page and you need 3 pages to say it, then you really don't understand the problem and the issue.
That's great advice. So shifting gears, and it's actually a good segue from sort of your path and the mid-career path to people that are just starting out. You mentioned internships. You mentioned development as a pathway in. What advice would you give to people who are just coming out of school, hear the clarion call, want to work on environmental sustainability issues? What advice, or where would you point them?
Well, I think the field is crowded now. I think I was lucky in that my timing worked, to really, the doors opened to me as new issues opened up. So it's a crowded space now. So I would say, looking for a small or medium-sized organization, nonprofit, and if you're going to land a position there, that's a good place to start. Let me back up. So I think you've got the nonprofit world, you have the government world, you have the consulting world, and you have the more traditional private sector business world. And so I think it's important to think which of those four sectors you might want to work in. You might want to be open to more than one. And then I say, I think the next thing is to develop a network, meet people, go to the trade shows, conferences, and figure out who's doing what and who you know and who knows somebody else. And I think I would say, you build a top 10 list. You're going to meet a lot of people. And I would say keep track of a person. If you think a person is well positioned to learn about or tell you about a job, I put them on your top 10 list. And keep going back to them, say, hey, I had an informational interview with last month. I'm just checking in. I'm still looking. Have you heard of anything? It's okay to do that. It doesn't take long to say, no, I haven't heard of anything, or, oh, I just saw something pop up on my computer yesterday. Because the first person you think of is the last person who contacted you. So, maybe it's not 10, maybe it's 5 people, but it's easy to keep doing these linear informational interviews where somebody gives you the name of somebody else. And, pretty soon you've talked to 25, 35 people and you still don't have a job. So that's one strategy. I think an entry-level job in government is a great place to start, especially if you're working for an elected official. City council member, county supervisor, state legislator, or even in DC for a member of Congress. Those are tough jobs to get, but they don't pay much and they require long hours, but they put you right up in the middle of it all. And it's a way to become an expert because your boss will want you to know something about a particular issue and you will become an expert in one thing, and you'll also get a great education in a whole variety of issues as well. So those are a couple strategies I think I would recommend.
And as far as internships at TNC, is what does the organization? Well, how are interns brought in? Is it through a centralized HR process, or does each program hire its own interns? And what do you look for in interns?
There's no formal process here at all. So it's very ad hoc, to be honest with you. And I don't see a lot of interns here. To be honest with you, a summer internship is hard for us because the intern comes in and it's hard to develop a project that they can complete in a 3-month period that's really discrete and useful. You spend a lot of time just bringing people up to speed. So I think we see some coming through university programs. So some of the universities have programs where they have a connection to the Nature Conservancy, and they keep sending people. There's a couple of business schools that send people for a 1-year fellowship. It's really opaque, to be honest with you, here at the Nature Conservancy.
So not well formalized. So perhaps it's sort of on an not individual basis. And I hear what you're saying. The summer internship can be challenging from the sponsor's perspective because it's such a short period of time. So just coming back to focusing on your career and your career path. You went through this major transition in your late 30s. Can you think of a particular setback or failure or challenge that you had to navigate and how you navigated it?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind was my move to San Francisco from Los Angeles. So I'd finished grad school. I had built a network in Los Angeles because of our client project around the trash incinerator. So I arrived in San Francisco without a network. And it was bleak. I couldn't figure out what to do. And actually, I did consulting for people in Los Angeles on and off for the first 9 months. I flew back to LA. And I taught a class at UCLA, and I worked with a planning group down there and so forth. So So the big setback was post-grad school moving and losing my network that I had. I didn't realize how powerful my network was until I didn't have it anymore. So that I would
How
say
long did it take you to sort of rebuild a network to the point where it was of equal value to your previous network in LA?
Well, what it took was one incident. So I was in San Francisco, first 9 months floundering, not necessarily floundering, but isolated. And as I said, really working in LA. I was working on the book with the professor in LA, working for a planning group in LA 2000, and working, teaching a class on natural resources. And I knew I wanted to work for a major environmental group. And I had a friend, a network still, right? This was somebody I knew from before who lived in Sacramento, was working for the Sierra Club. And she said, we're going to work with EDF and NRDC, two environmental groups, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're going to put on a conference for lawyers to discuss how to implement this new voter initiative called Prop 65. It was a toxics initiative that the voters had passed. And we need somebody to run a conference for us. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity for me to meet the people at EDF, NRDC, and Sierra Club. So I ran this conference for them. I was a conference event organizer. I knew nothing about it, but I pulled it off. And because of the timing, I think timing is crucial. The conference, the measure, the ballot initiative, the proposition was brand new. And so the lawyers weren't really sure how it was going to work. And so we started advertising for people registration. Basically, we oversubscribed, and in the end, there was a huge rush the morning of the conference. And we charged all the lawyers full price, who came in at the last minute. And not only was it a big success, it had about 250 lawyers there, but it generated a lot of money. So I thought my standing was going to be great with all these three environmental groups. And they turned their back and said, great job, you were really good, see you later. And so there I was with no job. And I thought, well, shoot, I worked hard, and this thing was beyond what anybody had hoped for success. It got press attention, and the timing was right, and I did a good job. So there was a woman who helped me stuff envelopes for that conference in the packets, for the attendees. And she knew I was looking, and I took a job at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and I was in a really boring section doing boring work in a bureaucratic structure where I was not happy. And 6 months later, she called me up and she said, I know this group. I know this woman who directs the Wilderness Society's office in San Francisco. They're looking for somebody to do national forest policy. And I said, great, I'm their guy. I know absolutely nothing about forest policy or the laws or anything, but I can make anything happen. And I lobbied my way into that job. I got somebody to call somebody that knew somebody who was a neighbor of somebody that said, oh, this guy's great. And the woman who hired me said, I like the way you lobbied. I know you know nothing about the issue, but people were calling me, I think you're going to be good at this position. I'm going to hire you. And so that started my forestry career in 1990, right after the earthquake in San Francisco. And from there, I became an expert, but it took me a while. So my network built after that point. So it took two people in two key places at the right time to make it happen. And then
sort of the flip side of the setback question is, what is the accomplishment that you're proudest of?
Well, I would say that from a macro perspective, that I built an integrated program around natural climate solutions for the Nature Conservancy in California, with help from a myriad others. It was not just me, for sure. I want to make clear, but I had this vision of the integrated and comprehensive role that nature could play in addressing climate change. And that included reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building climate resilience. The way that the climate policy discourse was bifurcated is people were focused on one and not the other. And I bridged that gap. And I did it by success in both arenas. And I've only now been able to see the merger that I had envisioned in about 2010 actually come together in policy and action. So that's very high level and very nebulous, if you will. The discrete components of that were, first of all, the forest carbon offset program that was folded into California's climate law. So I worked on the climate law itself and helped get that written and passed, but also we're working to make sure that there was a role for forests and a market-based program in that. And that was started in 2000, working for Gray Davis, and that came to fruition. I'm going to mention that a little bit later. And then we started to work on that whole effort. And then parallel to that, I worked on the climate resilience piece. And so, well, how do we create a policy that would drive natural climate solutions in climate adaptation? And I found out the state had no policy in 2008 on climate adaptation. There was nothing in place. So I started to try to work with others on legislation. And it took a lot of hard work. I failed the first couple of years with legislation. Couldn't get anybody interested, even a member of the legislature, state legislature, or environmental groups. They would sign my letter at the end of the legislative session, but nobody was into that. So eventually in 2015, I had an executive order that I've been shopping around with the governor's office that they kept rejecting, saying he'll never do it, he'll never do it. I had legislation. I was working with 3 different members of the legislature. We'd passed one bill by then, so we had a little beachhead, if you will, in the policy arena. And in 2015, I got a phone call one night before a conference, and the governor was set to be a keynote at this conference. And one of the staff members said, "I think you're going to be happy tomorrow. He's going to issue an executive order." And that day, the executive order integrated climate emission reduction or mitigation with climate resilience. And much of the executive order was verbatim from what I had written and been shopping around for a couple of years. So I was elated by that. And then that executive order really gave the impetus in the legislature to pass 3 bills. So the next year I was in Paris at the United Nations Climate Conference in the room. And that very month that led up to that Paris Agreement, the carbon offset program was fully validated. The California Air Board has accepted carbon credits from forests generated that were approved and verified and sold in a market to a regulated entity who submitted them for compliance and were accepted by the state. So here was the complete proof of concept of an idea that nobody had actually ever done, that somebody would create a financial incentive for better forestry that would provide benefits to the atmosphere. And then at the same time, I'm sitting there thinking of the 3 climate adaptation bills that I helped write and pass, and the executive order that had now created a comprehensive platform for California to address climate adaptation. And then the Paris Agreement is signed, and I'm in the room, and the room goes crazy, 2,000 people screaming. It was really the pinnacle of my professional career.
Quite an experience. It was, and without going on too much of a tangent.
That was a great moment. Yeah.
How imperiled is the work that everybody accomplished at Paris? I mean, how are the states able to kind of move forward in a significant enough way to keep it moving while this administration attempts to ruin it?
We were together in Marrakesh too, were we not? So that was the moment. That was the UN climate meeting that happened on the day of the election, and you and I were there. And so I would say, starting then, we were despondent, right? You and I and others were. The people from the U.S. were pretty much crawling on the floor. It was miserable, and the day of the election. So, but what you saw there were the other countries of the world said, okay, tough break in the U.S. And within the Nature Conservancy, we had people there, staff people, colleagues from other countries. So there were colleagues that from Australia. Well, they had a cap and trade program there that had been scuttled by an administration. We had people there from Colombia who had a peace agreement that had just been scuttled. We had people in England had gone through Brexit. And so my colleagues were saying, yeah, it sucks. It's terrible. But look, put it in a global perspective, you're just one country. And yes, you're big and you're powerful and it's really important. But, these kinds of setbacks happen. So to me, that really helped. And then you do look at what cities and states are doing through the C40 initiative and the R20 initiative and the U.S. Climate Alliance initiative and the We Are Still In coalition and the Under 2 coalition and the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force and the Balik Papan Challenge in Indonesia. I mean, I could go on. So people are stepping up in cities and states in the U.S. and around the world to meet the reductions necessary from the U.S. Will it be enough or not? It's hard to tell. But, the UN process, unfortunately, is a slow grinding process. So we will have a 2020 election before the first commitments from countries are even due. So we'll see what happens. I need to be hopeful because I'm doing this work and you are too.
Who do you look to? Who inspires you? Who has done work on climate and continues to do work that is either a model for you or something that pushes you along?
Well, I would say that people like James Hansen and Bill McKibben and 350.org are really great in pushing more. What you're doing is not enough.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they're out there. Michael Mann too, the scientists, climate scientists. So I think that's really important. Then I look at the people that I, engage with. Mary Nichols at the California Air Board. I've been working with her on environmental issues for 20 years. She's inspires me. She keeps pushing for more all the time. I think Jerry Brown and Michael Blumberg have been great. They have been on the inside, if you will, pushing the agenda. And I would say Nicholas Stern in the new climate economy has been really great as well.
Is there a particular book that's either that you're reading now or that comes to mind, either that's specific to this space or just from which you draw inspiration in general?
Well, I'm reading Man of La Mancha now, the world's first novel.
Cool.
Don Quixote. So I like that. I think James Hansen did a couple of books, one on the chemistry and the physics of climate change that were really helpful to me. He did another one called Storms of Our Grandchildren or something. I think that was very powerful. Bill McKibben's The End of Nature is great. What else? Those
are some good suggestions. So as we kind of wrap up, and as you look ahead, and we've talked about some of the challenges with U.S. policy right now, but also the fact that the vast majority of countries are moving forward. I guess it's debatable. Are they moving forward fast enough? But what do you see as being the most exciting opportunities in the sustainability or climate space writ large, sort of in the context of where will the work be? How are we going to push this ball forward? How are we going to both increase the level of ambition and achieve that level of ambition?
Well, I think the work is going to be at the local level. I see climate action plans and adding resilience issues to it. I think mayors have really been great. They are empirical, not political. One of them said never saw a partisan pothole. So I think that's where the work going to be, I think, for people. I don't know if that really translates into global ambition at addressing climate change. So,
well, it's how the work gets done. So the ambition can be set.
So I would say the keys are implementation, action and implementation, as well as the sort of networking and politics. There's two buckets, if you will. So political leaders are really going to be important. So, voter registration, getting politicians elected that support climate change, I think is really critical. And will be, even no matter who's in power, even if it's someone like Obama, who's really committed to climate action. So, so I don't think we're seeing the charismatic leader that we need. So maybe out there in the universe of podcasts of folks who are listening to this podcast, there's someone who's really going to step up and be an inspiring young leader that's going to emerge and really make a difference. So I urge you, whoever you are, step forward.
Indeed. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up. Louis, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for all of the work that you continue to do on climate and natural systems.
Well, thank you, David. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
The Sustainability Leaders Podcast is a resource of Jobs with Impact. Our engineer and associate producer is Ian Swanke. Theme music is also by Ian Swanke. I'm David Rosenheim. If you like the show, please rate and review us on iTunes or your preferred platform. And be sure to tell your friends and colleagues who want to make a difference. Thanks for listening. See you next week.